Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey, and in today's video, I'll be running through my team selection ahead of Gameweek 28 with 2 free transfers and quite a big decision on captaincy this week as well. Welcome back everyone to another video. If you did enjoy today's content, as always, it would mean the world to me if you could just drop a like on the video, hit subscribe if you're new around here as well. Let's start off by talking about my goalkeeper and my defence as a whole. Starting off in goal, it's pretty easy for me between now and when I plan on wildcarding in game week 31. Brentford come into some great fixtures now. Kelleher away at Burnley seems like a pretty easy choice, although Dubravka at home to Brentford isn't awful in the sense that if you've got, let's say, Sanchez away at Arsenal, then maybe you start Dubravka instead. But for me, I think it's a pretty easy decision. Kelleher racks up the save points, very cheap at 4.6 million as well. Might get the price rise overnight, actually, so he might go up again. But Burnley away, followed by another 3 decent fixtures up until the point where I look at wildcarding. I'm very happy to own him. Moving into the defence, I think this is where a number of the interesting calls need to be made this week. Gabriel is going nowhere until at least game week 31 when he blanks. But even then, I've got quite a lot of value tied up in him. I'll probably try and devise a strategy where I just bench him that week alongside probably Erling Haaland and then get rid of the other players that blank instead, just so I save that team value, because I do think there's a very high chance that I will want him by the time I wildcard as well. Moving across, I'm much less confident on Timber. Obviously got brought off early in game week 27 after 57 minutes. Got an assist, but also got booked. And of course, didn't make it to 60 for the extra appearance point. So very frustrating. But at least it's a reminder that he is capable of returning, I suppose. And I do just wonder if, given the week off, he does look pretty likely to start yet again against Chelsea. The only thing that is playing on my mind now a little bit is if Ben White is fit, then there is quite a short turnaround between game week 28 and game week 29. I think it, for them at least, is Saturday to Tuesday. So is there a chance that Timber only plays one of the two or gets reduced minutes in both? Who knows? But I still think, for what it's worth, he is first choice. And although he's not looked brilliant recently and been a bit leggy, to be honest, I think the week rest will have done him the world of good. So I'd be quite surprised if he didn't start against Chelsea. That being said, later on in the video, there are options where I might look at selling him. So we'll come on to that later on, but just so you know, it is on my mind. And then I've got a bit of a decision this week between Anderson or Munoz, which one to start. I've currently landed on Anderson at home to Spurs. I was not impressed with Spurs' performance under Tudor against Arsenal. Now, admittedly, it is against probably the best defence in the world right now, so you don't expect them to create a ton of chances. But North London derby at home, first game under a new manager, and they created very little other than the gifted chance from Declan Rice, where it was entirely down to an Arsenal mistake, and they obviously did capitalise. But outside of that, it didn't really feel like they were ever that likely to score. I think Raya spooned one off of the line in the last few minutes of the match, but not all that much to be excited about. With that in mind, Spurs at home for Anderson. Fulham's defence, not too bad this season. He does pick up DEFCON very regularly. I think I have it marginally ahead of Munoz away at Man United. I think the swinging factor is the reminder that Crystal Palace play on the Thursday evening, and it's an important game. I expect Munoz to play. Will he and Crystal Palace be a bit leggy come the Sunday against Man United? Quite possibly. And they've not looked great anyway. So although he's got great attacking threat, and he does sometimes pick up DEFCON more so than most fullbacks would, I very slightly think I've got Anderson ahead of him. But let me know in the comments below which one you would start, because there is certainly an argument to start Munoz given his attacking threat, and he could bag a goal, maybe even a brace, a couple of attacking returns in any game. So it is risky to do this. But I think I've got Anderson slightly ahead at the moment. So moving into the midfield, I am planning on playing 5 in midfield, although Enzo Fernandez in the middle is very unlikely to be there. And if I did keep him, I'd probably just play a 4-4-2 with Munoz in the starting 11 instead. But because I'm almost certain to make that transfer, I wanted to show you the setup I'm actually expecting to use, which is hopefully more valuable to you. Enzo Fernandez will probably be going. I'll talk about who for later on in a future section. In terms of the other 4 midfielders, Bruno Fernandes is in the captaincy conversation. We'll discuss that later as well, but very happy to own him. The one thing I will reference now is ever since Carrick came in, he's been playing in that advanced role in the 10, which is great news for attacking threat. But at the same time, the DEFCON has been completely wiped from his repertoire. So it's not, again, a crisis by any means. In fact, most people would suggest that overall it's net good for Bruno to be in that more advanced area, even if he has lost DEFCON. But having those extra 2 points in roughly 40-50% of the matches was quite nice. So that does impact him a little bit. But again, the attacking threat goes up. So it's not a crisis. Rodgers as well. I think I'm firmly in the camp of if you don't own him now, there are probably other players I'd prioritize over him. But if you do have him, I'm very happy to own him all the way through to when I plan on wildcarding in game week 32. The fixtures are good enough. And even if he did have more difficult fixtures, he's fairly talismanic to what Aston Villa are doing. He's always on the pitch. He takes some set pieces, and he is the kind of player that just gets 2, 2, 2, 15, 2. So I'm hoping that this is one of the weeks, or I get a couple of those game weeks where he gets the big explosion between now and wildcarding. But again, admittedly, if I didn't own him by now, I probably wouldn't be flocking towards him. I haven't seen anything from him to suggest that he's a must own. But I also don't think that he's a priority sell given the other issues in my team. So I'm happy enough to just hold on to him and hope that he bags a couple of those hauls between now and when I wildcard. The next 3 players, Enzo Fernandez can pretty much go for me. He's been very frustrating, 6.8 million now, I think. And there are other players around that price and a little bit more expensive. Of course, I do have 2.8 million in the bank to spend that I can afford, that I just think provide much higher upside. If you had to hold on to him or other Chelsea players, again, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world, especially if you can bench him in game week 28 against Arsenal. After that, the next 3 fixtures aren't too bad, but I do have a couple of free transfers, and I think there are players I prefer in that position with potentially higher upside. He's off of penalties. Reece James has started taking more set pieces away from him as well. And although he's going to tick along, I'm sure, I think there are better options elsewhere. So he is a planned transfer for me. Elliot Anderson and Declan Rice are kind of in that middle ground. Elliot Anderson has never done anything wrong for me. He's averaging 4.8 points a week since I brought him in. So very, very happy with that. And Brighton away, again, you'd expect him to get 4 or 5 points. The DEFCON is insanely high, but he has been brought off early a couple of times in a row now. So I'm monitoring that. If it continues to become a trend rather than just a one-off bit of a blip under the new manager, then I will consider his position in my team, because that DEFCON threshold, sometimes it's pretty close and he needs the 90 minutes to hit it. As soon as he stops hitting it regularly, he becomes much less powerful as a cheap budget gem for me. And there are other good midfielders at that price point who are getting 90 minutes, in some cases even have penalties as well, that I could flock towards if Elliot Anderson doesn't quite do it for me over the next few game weeks. So I am monitoring it, but right now I'm gonna just keep a watching brief on him and not make any moves just yet. The final one is Declan Rice. Now, I think I could go either way on Declan Rice this week. A bit like Elliot Anderson, I expect him to tick along just fine. The floor is quite high. He's hitting DEFCON regularly. And against Chelsea, you would say the odds of him hitting DEFCON again are pretty decent. So that gives him 4 points generally as a floor, unless he gets yellow carded, sent off, of course. But also it could be a lot higher than that. His underlying attacking data is not bad. It's running at about 0.35 per 90. That's fine. So 1 in 3 games, you'd expect an attacking return. And when he does, he also quite likely gets bonus as well. So I can see a universe where I sell him for potentially a quite high upside midfielder, but that other midfielder, and there are a few options I'll talk about later, those midfielders might just end up blanking a couple of game weeks in a row. And because they're not very good on DEFCON, their floor is a bit lower than Rice. And I've had it a million times before where, despite good fixtures, midfielders like that can just go on a bit of a run. Enzo Fernandez is a perfect example where they get the data, but they just don't get the returns. Whereas with Rice, you might get a couple of returns and you're quite likely to get DEFCON as well. So I am reluctant to make a rash decision there. but there are so many midfielders that I really like the look of, and I don't want to get left behind. So I am open to selling him, and we'll talk about that later on. Okay, so not much to talk about in my forward line this week. Erling Haaland and Thiago, both with good fixtures. They will both be in the captaincy debate for me later on in the video. And although Erling Haaland's shot volume has gone down, his creativity has gone up a fair bit since they've started playing that dual number 9 role with either Marmoush or Semenyo alongside him. And I think against Leeds, that's quite a nice matchup where until recently, because Man City were playing with one centre forward, Leeds probably would have been able to handle that a little bit better with 3 centre backs. Now, if they're playing the split forwards, it's going to be a bit more difficult to deal with. So I think that he is still the expensive player that I would like to own in my FPL team right now. There were arguments starting to rise about maybe moving him on and doing a double swap to get to Salah, but nothing I saw from Salah against Nottingham Forest filled me with any sort of confidence. Got brought off early. His reaction to getting brought off wasn't the best, and he didn't really do much in the game itself either. So I think for me, it's Erling Haaland is just the simple choice as the premium right now. Alongside him, Thiago, if you don't own him already, now is probably the ideal jumping on point. Burnley away, followed by good fixtures through to the wild card. In fact, I think they're now going up against 4 teams in a row that are at the bottom 4 of the XGC charts for the last 6 game weeks. So if he's ever going to haul, you'd hope it would be in the next 4 game weeks. He has been quite frustrating as of late, but it's about finding the next player who's going to haul, and I think he's as likely as any. So I'm going to be holding on to him, and I would advise that he is a pretty solid option to be buying now, even if you've got someone like João Pedro who has done really well. I think that move does still make a lot of sense. Chase the fixtures, chase the upside. He's got penalties. He's still got good data. Fingers crossed, the form turns a corner soon. Okay, so moving into my transfer plans for Game Week 28. I'll try and keep this section a bit more brief than I did in the previous video. I've mapped out my transfer plans earlier in the game week, so do go check out that video if you want more extensive thoughts on this. Basically, I am quite likely to make my 2 free transfers this week, and I'm definitely not ruling out my first hit of the season. All 3 of these moves look really tempting to me, and I can see all 3 of them gaining enough over the next 4 game weeks to make the hit worthwhile. Now, let's start off with the most likely one. That's actually the one in the middle. That's Enzo Fernandez out. I think if I was forced to only make 1 free transfer this week, it would be him, and it probably would be to one of the more expensive midfielders that I feel, at least, give plenty of upside. Now, those 2 options for me are Wirtz and Mbeumo. You could absolutely still look at Semenyo if you're on a slightly different strategy or you've got fewer players that blank in Game Week 31. But as it stands, I've got a bit of an issue there. I can't really afford to be bringing in another player that blanks in just 4 game weeks time. So that kind of rules out Semenyo for me. So the 2 that I'm looking at are Mbeumo and Wirtz. Now, Wirtz, sadly, got injured in the warm-up for Game Week 27, missed out, and we're still waiting on confirmation that he's definitely going to be okay for Game Week 28. The early signs are positive, but I think it is important to wait for that update. The fact that I've needed to wait for that has kind of locked me out of a really nice triple move, which would have been Enzo Fernandez, Rice, and Munoz to Virgil van Dijk, Wirtz, and Mbeumo. Now, I think that would have been really powerful. I had nothing in the bank to do it with on Sunday, but I just couldn't take that gamble. With Mbeumo yet to play, Wirtz injured, it seemed like a massive, massive risk. So I've been priced out of that because of the price swings over the last few days. And it does probably mean that I'm looking in the cheaper bucket of midfielders if I wanted to make another midfield transfer. I can still do Enzo to either Wirtz or Mbeumo for free. That's absolutely fine and won't need to make up money elsewhere. But if I did want to then also look at moving on Rice, then I probably need to shop in the lower bracket to bring in an affordable midfielder because I've been priced out of both Wirtz and Mbeumo. For what it's worth, out of Wirtz and Mbeumo, I'm very happy with owning either. I almost do wish that I still have that opportunity to buy both of them. And technically, there is a route that I can still do that right now. That would be Enzo and Rice to Wirtz and Mbeumo. And then I'd also sell Timber instead of Munoz down to Virgil van Dijk. That is something I'm considering, but at time of recording, I do have the exact money in the bank to do that. it is for a -4, and we'll come on to Timber in a bit, but I've got more reluctance to get rid of Timber than I do Munoz, and that's now the only route I could get both Mbeumo and Wirtz for. So out of the two of them, if I were to make a choice between Wirtz and Mbeumo, I think if I got confirmation that Wirtz was fully fit, I would probably just about prioritize him. But there is a quick turnaround between Game Week 28 and Game Week 29. And if Wirtz is even slightly a doubt, or there's some sort of suggestion that his minutes might be managed, then that might be enough to put me off, because I do need a player that's going to play both West Ham and Wolves, not just one of the two. So I do have that in the back of my mind, and I'm perfectly happy to just go with Mbeumo instead. He's got slightly more goal threat rather than attacking threat. Technically more attacking threat as well, generally. The XGI is slightly higher. And the fixtures aren't terrible either. Now, admittedly, if it was a heads up between the two of them, a 50-50 call, I do prefer Wirtz because of the fixtures, because he's so good on bonus whenever he does return. But I don't think it's a big drop off to Mbeumo at all. And I don't foresee too many managers buying him now, given the fixtures on paper don't look as appealing as some of the other teams and some of the cheaper midfielders as well. But for me, I still back him. I still think that he's going to do really well over the next 4. He did go off early in Game Week 27, so one to monitor. It looked like a bit of cramp, so I don't expect it to be an issue. But it is something that I'll keep my eye on, and another reason that potentially I'm not going to make a move until later on in the game week. So all things equal, and if Wirtz is fully fit, I'll probably prioritize him, but Mbeumo absolutely fine as well. Now, moving down to Declan Rice, if I did want to make a second midfield move, likely I won't be able to get Wirtz and Mbeumo, so I'll have to shop in the cheaper brackets. I've narrowed it down to my 4 favourites, and I think I am now choosing between these 4. I want to reference Tavernier to begin with. At 5.3 million on penalties, on set pieces, could be a bit of a game-breaking bargain, but given that tight turnaround between 28 and 29, and the fact that he's only just come back from a hamstring injury that kept him out for quite a while, I'm reluctant to say that he will definitely get full 90 minutes in both of these matches. I can see minutes managed. He might not even start in the first game, given that he only got 10 minutes off the bench in Game Week 27. So I think for me, if I'm thinking about it logically, it's just slightly too much of a risk for me if I were to buy him this week. So that leaves the 3 remaining options. That's Ryan, obviously teammate of Tavernier at Bournemouth. Dango Altara at 5.9 million, playing against Burnley away this week, which is the really juicy fixture. That's the one that you want to jump on. But then you've also got Harry Wilson, who still has Burnley to play in the next 4 game weeks, and in that time has 3 home fixtures against Spurs, West Ham and Burnley, all of which are fighting at the bottom end of the table. And in the away game, it's Nottingham Forest, who are also in that relegation fight as well. So I am very interested in Harry Wilson. He even picked up DEFCON, which is quite rare for him, but he picked it up, I think, before half-time in Game Week 27. So maybe another route to points. Obviously, we know he's a great set-piece taker, and he is staying on the pitch for quite a long time now. I'm pretty split between Wilson and Dango. I think the thing that would maybe just about push me towards Wilson is those 3 home fixtures, but also the fact that in Dango's position, I mean, technically not his exact position, but you've also got Sharda and Lewis Potter that will be vying for minutes in those forward positions. Now, Thiago's going to probably be locked in that centre forward role, but the wide positions, I can see a universe where Dango might get brought off early with the tight turnaround, or might, worst case scenario, get a benching if he performs poorly in the match prior. So I think he's good for Game Week 28. Burnley away, that's the great fixture. You want him for that. And I am still considering just going for him and attacking the immediate fixture. But buying Wilson now saves me a transfer over the next 4 game weeks, because he's a player that I almost certainly will want for Game Week 31 anyway. So I think I'm ever so slightly pivoting towards Wilson, but also a quick shout out to Ryan, who's looked fantastic recently. Really good underlying data, good price point, love the player. Good fixtures as well for Bournemouth. The only thing that, again, it feels like a 5% chance that it might happen, but could you see him getting rested, benched, brought off early, given the amount of options they've got in that front line? Possibly. It's very unlikely, but I'd say it's less likely that it happens to Wilson, and we've got more data and more knowledge of Harry Wilson in the Premier League. Ryan so far looks great. Love it as a punt, and he is still in my consideration, but I think I slightly prefer Wilson. Now, finally, I know I've gone on a little bit, so I'll try and wrap this up quickly, but in defense, I'm also considering a transfer. I think out of the three that I'm looking at potentially buying, it's Virgil van Dijk for me. I could look at James Hill instead. If I did want to buy Wirtz and Mbeumo, I could compromise by selling Munoz for Hill, and then I've got plenty of money to do it with. But I think I do prefer Virgil van Dijk given the next 4 fixtures. I think the clean sheet odds are good. The attacking data is looking pretty decent recently. And he hits DEFCON fairly regularly, although it must be said nowhere near as much as Hill. I just think the difference in the quality of the defence would suggest to me that out of the 2 teams, Liverpool are the more likely to keep a couple, maybe even 3 clean sheets in the next 4. So I think I'd prefer Virgil van Dijk. And if I were to buy him, it would probably be for Munoz more likely than not. I have not been impressed by Crystal Palace recently. They play on the Thursday, and although I do like Munoz's underlying attacking data, the defensive data has been nowhere near as good as Arsenal's, and Timber gets pretty close to matching Munoz in terms of the XGI per 90 as well. So I think I'd prefer to get rid of Munoz over Timber, but I completely understand why loads of people are selling Timber. He's been incredibly frustrating, and he is a bit more expensive. It would allow me to do other things elsewhere. So it is still in my consideration to just get rid of Timber, but the clean sheet odds over the next 3 are looking really good. So I kind of quite like the fact that loads of people are selling him because it makes him a little bit more differential. And I do still feel like he is capable of getting a big haul. We've seen it once or twice this season already. And although it's not happened recently, after having a rest for a full week, will he be sharp enough? Will he be ready to get back at it again and hopefully be back to his best? I'm crossing my fingers that's the case, but I understand why a lot of people wouldn't agree with that. So by all means, Timber to Van Dijk does make a lot of sense, but given I've also got Munoz, who also blanks in Game Week 31, out of the 2, I think I slightly prefer getting rid of Munoz first. Now, like I said, I do currently have the exact money to do Wirtz and Mbeumo and Virgil van Dijk in if I got rid of Timber instead of Munoz, but I'll likely get priced out of that before I want to make the decision anyway. So I think the likely combination that I make is at least one of Wirtz or Mbeumo in for Enzo, and then that other transfer will either go on Rice to Wilson or Munoz to Van Dijk. And then if I wanted to take a hit, I'd do both of those. So I think I'm probably 50-50 on whether I take all 3 and take the hits or just do a combination of 2 of them. If I was doing just 2 of them right now today, I think it would be Wirtz if he is cleared fit for Enzo and Munoz to Van Dijk, and then just leave it be for now and hope that Rice can match up to some of the cheaper midfielders for one more week before then making a decision 1 week down the line. Okay, so I realise that this team selection video is probably going to be a bit longer than usual anyway, but we do have an important conversation to be had about the best captaincy choice for Game Week 28. I think there are 3 standout candidates to me, that is Erling Haaland, Bruno Fernandes and Thiago, but you could very comfortably suggest a Liverpool player like Ekitike, maybe Salah, maybe Wirtz if he's fit, and Mbeumo at Man United as well. Maybe even a Brentford midfielder like Dango or Sharda could be interesting differentials. I don't hate any of them, but for the sake of time, let's narrow it down to the top 3 for now. I think Thiago is a nice outsider, but given the fact that his underlying attacking data matches Bruno's, but he gets 1 less point for the goal anyway, and he hasn't been in the best form recently either, I think I'm happy enough to just own him. And I think the effective ownership will be low enough still that I'll get a bit of a benefit from that. Admittedly, though, it is a great fixture. So if you fancy a differential, he will be more differential than Fernandes or Haaland, and he could absolutely bag a couple against Burnley. They have looked poor at the back recently. They've got the worst XGC per 90 of all 20 Premier League teams. Of course, the worst on this graphic as well. So don't let me put you off. Between Fernandes and Haaland, unfortunately, I think it's a bit of a coin flip. So I don't have a definite answer here, and I will be going on gut myself a little bit. I don't think you can really call this one wrong. I don't think there's a standout option. I don't think there's anything that you can say before the game week is played that would say one is way ahead of the other, but there are pros and cons to each. So with Haaland, the pros are his underlying attacking data is fantastic. He's looked like he's back fit, fresh again, and back in form. But on the con side of things, because they're playing those split nines, the split forwards, his shot volume has come quite drastically down. His chance creation's gone up a little bit, but if you want big hauls out of him, you want that shot volume inside the box as high as physically possible, and that has dipped as of late. So I think the likelihood of a haul, a big haul, has slightly decreased, but it is still Erling Haaland, it is still Man City. So there's still a good chance of a haul anyway. It's just maybe slightly lower than it might have been earlier on in the season. They're up against Leeds, who are not a terrible defence, but 1.54 XGC per 90 isn't amazing. So that's another argument, maybe in the pros column for Haaland. But of course, they're not by any means the worst team in the Premier League defensively, so they won't have it easy. One thing I would suggest is that the new system for Man City might not be the easiest for Leeds to deal with, because it does take a little while for teams to work out new systems that Man City deploy. And Pep has stumbled onto something, or created something. Stumbled on feels so harsh. Created something that does seem to be working quite well for both Haaland and Semenyo, or Marmoush, whoever's playing in that second striker role. I do feel like he is a strong captaincy candidate this week, even away from home at Elland Road, where they won't make it easy. I think the new system might be quite hard for Leeds to cope with. On the other side, Bruno Fernandes, well, the pros are he's at home against a team that are in disarray at the moment. They've lost their captain, their leader at the back over the January transfer window, and Crystal Palace play in midweek in a really important game in the Europa Conference League that they need to win. So are they going to be a bit tired? Quite possibly. Bruno Fernandes and Man United, on the other hand, will not be tired. They've got the midweek off, so they'll be completely fresh and ready to go against Crystal Palace. Their defensive data is the best out of all of the teams on this graphic, but not by much. It's not way above that of Leeds at 1.49. And of course, they themselves have been on a downward trajectory for quite a while now. And who knows whether Glasner's even going to be there over the weekend. If they lose in the Europa Conference League, there are rumours that he might be off before we even get to Man United. So it's a club in a bit of turmoil right now. Fernandes should be fresh and ready to go. And Man United have been in really good form since the turn of the year. In fact, I think they've picked up the most points out of any Premier League club in 2026. So I think if I was really pressed for an answer right now, I would go with Fernandes slightly over Haaland. And that is where my captaincy currently lies. But there's very little between the two. And if we're weighing up some of the cons for Bruno, the DEFCON has disappeared. That is maybe something that many will underestimate, but having 2 points in 50% of the games is quite powerful. And if he hauls, having that extra 2 points is really quite handy as a captaincy candidate. So if you've still got him getting good underlying attacking data, even without DEFCON, he's still a fantastic option. But that extra 2 points does go a long way. And if you watched him against Everton, it wasn't his best game. He was fairly anonymous in that one, and they didn't find him as often as you'd want them to find him in the middle of the park. So maybe there's an argument to say that playing in the 10 is not working out quite as well as maybe FPL managers thought it would, because maybe they're not able to find him as often. He's not dropping into those deep spaces and picking up the ball, acting as a bit of a quarterback. And in those advanced roles, he is much more reliant on players finding him in those areas than him just creating the opportunities from scratch. That might be way too much narrative. So I think right now I am still just about on Bruno Fernandes, but it is almost a coin flip with Erling Haaland, so it could go either way. I would suggest that Fernandes' ownership will be a bit lower. So in a true 50-50 call, if you're chasing rank, then Fernandes probably makes the most sense. But again, there's really not much between them. Okay, so moving into my full team selection for Game Week 28, I've mapped in the transfers that I think at time of recording I'm most likely to make. That would be Enzo out for Wirtz if he's fit. That would be Mbeumo if Wirtz wasn't fit, but you know that already from watching the video. And then in defence, it would probably be upgrading Munoz to Virgil van Dijk, both of course at home to West Ham. And then Anderson would actually move to the bench at home to Spurs. Now, that does play on my mind a little bit because Anderson at home to Spurs is pretty decent. I don't think that's a bad option to be starting whatsoever. I don't think I'd start him ahead of Elliot Anderson or Rice, although there's a conversation to be had there. But maybe the more obvious route is to just start Anderson and not make the Munoz to Van Dijk move. That being said, I do think that Virgil van Dijk is an upgrade on Anderson this week, and therefore it does make sense to make the move. It also reduces the amount of blank game week players I have by one. So it does get me one step in the right direction, and it gets Virgil van Dijk in ahead of a good fixture. So I think I'm quite likely to make that move as well. And as I mentioned earlier, the hit is very much on the table. That would be for Declan Rice, I suppose, if I'm thinking that Virgil van Dijk would come in instead of Munoz before I made the Rice move. And when you pitch it like that, I'm not sure that taking a hit to get rid of Declan Rice to bring in someone like Harry Wilson, Dango Altara, or Ryan is necessarily worth it this week, because I do think that Rice could do pretty well. Chelsea are actually very poor from set pieces. The data is shockingly bad, and Rice is very good from set pieces. So I do wonder if maybe getting rid of Declan Rice this week could be a mistake, but I do need to get rid of him eventually. And some of the players I'm looking at buying have great fixtures this week and for the next few. So I can see the argument to taking the -4. It kind of gets the moves I want to do done earlier, and it means that I've almost got one more free transfer to use between now and wildcarding, because I'm basically paying 4 points to get an extra move done now that I would have otherwise gotten done with a free transfer later on down the line. So I am quite tempted to do it. I'm almost certainly going to make 2 free transfers. Right now, it would be for the 2 Liverpool boys. But of course, Wirtz's fitness is up in the air, so that could easily be Mbeumo. And then a decision will be made as to whether or not I want one of the cheaper midfielders this week as well, or whether I'd prioritise that second midfielder move ahead of the defender move, because I could just play Anderson at home to Spurs, and I think that's kind of fine too. So let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you've got any questions, do feel free to drop the comment below and I'll try and get back to you as quickly as possible before the Game Week 28 deadline. Good luck in Game Week 28, and I'll see you on the other side.